Hello, everyone. So for my final project, I'm going to be talking about how we can distinguish between experimental analysis of behavior, ABA, and the professional practice and application of behaviorism. Um, so this is the fourth aspect of the first section of the BACB's BCBA task list, and it's a required item for this course. The reason I chose this is because when I was going through and doing the quizzes in this class, some of the problems that I most often kind of had some trouble with were kind of distinguishing, okay, here's this scenario, is this EAB, ABA, professional practice? Is this just general behaviorism? What is it? So I figured, if I need to study this anyway, might as well make it my final project. So, one of the questions I asked myself when I first contacted this material, specific to kind of figuring out what aspect of behaviorism are we talking about, I was asking myself, well, it's all ABA, ain't it? Well, yeah, but actually, no. Wasn't that a fun meme? Yeah, boy, what a quirky millennial I am. So, behaviorism. This is kind of the broad term, the broad category. It is the philosophy of the science of behavior. Within behaviorism, we are emphasizing that objective methods are used when we're investigating why organisms do what they do. We say that behavior results from interactions between the environment and sometimes within the individual, but that's radical behaviorism, and other individual variables within that organism's context or environment. It encourages that hypotheses be tested using experimental methods to understand the behaviors within the environmental context. We want to see how these environmental manipulations are kind of affecting the organism's actions, what they're doing. And really, the key point of behaviorism is that what people do can be understood. So we have behaviorism. That's like this broad category, right? What I just talked about, that's science. B.F. Skinner takes behaviorism, takes that classical understanding of behaviorism, that respondent behaviorism, and adds to it and says, well, actually learning history, that actually is relevant to how somebody is or some organism is interacting with their environment. That then coins experimental analysis of behavior. He says, well, we're going to study operants, we're going to study effects of the environment and learning history, how those things interact result in these behaviors, right? Through translational behavior analysis, which is something I learned when I was setting up these slides and reading through Cooper, Hare, and Heward, that's when you actually transform the EAB components, the EAB findings, right? These applications of theory on a clinical, not clinical, but laboratory setting, and shift it towards developing technologies that can then be applied, and that is applied behavior analysis. Those technologies then become professional practice. And so that's like a broad overview, and we'll go through each one of these components. So, experimental analysis of behavior, like I said, this was coined by B.F. Skinner. It formally began upon the publication of his The Behavior of Organisms in 1938. That publication separates respondent conditioning, respondent behaviorism, that kind of that old school methodological behaviorism, and separates out these other internal variables like private events, learning history, and says those have something to do with how someone interacts with the world. It is not just biological determinism that tells us we're behaving in a certain way. So in this publication, he kind of separates operant conditioning out from behaviorism what was behaviorism at the time, what is now respondent behaviorism. And he says this is a separate thing, and this needs to be focused on. Studying that separate thing, that operant behaviorism, is what experimental analysis of behavior is. Skinner actually developed this entire field based on that publication. The study of operant behavior, that was termed by Skinner as the experimental analysis of behavior. It forms general statements about functional relations between behaviors and the environmental events in which they happen. It's applying theory, right? These theories, these big overarching theories like operant conditioning, onto very specific laboratory settings that are experimentally controlled. And they're answering really kind of very broad, basic questions. So then, at some point in the 1940s, I'm sure, some guy goes, boy golly gee, what other EAB principles could we weaponize in the clinical context to help people? And that is what translational behavior analysis is. That's what I was talking about earlier. It's something I learned when I was creating this presentation. So we know what makes a behavior do. Now what do we do? What if we took that information that we got in the EAB setting and apply it in a clinical context? That's translational behaviorism. Fuller is one of the first authors that actually talks about this in his publication. He called it engineering behavior. He was actually able to teach physical responses in a clinical context using EAB principles, things that were proven in an EAB context. And specifically, he taught an 18-year-old individual who had very high support needs, who was actually labeled as vegetative, right? Imagine this individual, profoundly developmentally disabled, just laying vegetatively in a bed. That's all their functioning was allowed to, allow them to do. And at the time, supports didn't really exist for individuals like this. Well, he found out if he applied something he learned in the experimental analysis of behavior, papers talking about how they could elicit responses in individuals through teaching them to discriminate between, or teaching them to pick up on discriminative stimuli to engage in a behavior. In order to get some reward. Fuller applies that to this individual and actually teaches them to do these physical body movements that people thought could never have been done. And he's actually that scientist that I referred to before that said, golly gee, what ways can we apply this experimental analysis of behavior in the real world? That is applied behavior analysis. That paper that I talked about, The Psychiatric Nurse as a Behavioral Engineer. Applied behavior analysis was the first, I guess Fuller was one of the first people to say, hey, we can apply this experimental behavior analysis on these real-world settings, in these real-world settings, in order to create change. Specifically, what ABA is the engineering of those technologies, of those methods, that are meant to then down the line be applied in a clinical context. But they're not being applied anywhere outside of the laboratory yet, or very controlled environments. It's the study of the efficacy of those technologies that is what ABA is. And these ABA technologies are written in a way that can be replicated so that then they can be applied in the real world. So now we have these technologies, right? What if we actually use them now? Wouldn't that be neat? If you answered no, then why are you here? Really, just close this presentation. It doesn't really make sense. So I'm going to give you this snorting dude. But if you answered yes or meh, then congratulations. It makes sense that you're actually in this course because that's the whole point of what we're doing here, right? We are now into professional practice. Professional practice, this is how we're taking the things from behaviorism that then became radical behaviorism, that then was studied through experimental analysis of behavior, that then, through translational behavior analysis, was turned into applied behavior analysis, right? We created those technologies that then guide our practice and help us actually make change in the real world, which is what I think most of us want to do. It helps people be successful. It improves the lives of the individuals that we work with. It's actually, we talk about this in psychology as there's an art to psychology. Well, in behavior analysis, there is an art to applied behavior analysis, and that is the professional practice. Because not every single situation or context is going to have specific data published that tell us exactly what to do, right? So we're applying what we learned through ABA to the professional practice in order to help people. And honestly, I feel like that's what most of us here in these courses are going to end up doing as BCBAs. And so that is like a broad overview of how we get from behaviorism all the way down to the professional practice. And hopefully will help you understand a little bit about how you can differentiate between all of these different parts of the field.